Now, last night I gave you some homework. How many of you did it? Really? I am impressed. Several of you did. And basically what I wanted you to see was that there was beginning to be a corollary between Daniel and Revelation. That second beast in Revelation chapter 13 issues a death decree, doesn't he? And Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2 started killing the wise men because they didn't have the answer to his spiritual question. And we're going to continue to see that connection as we move in to chapter 3 tonight. I'm not going to be able to take the time to explain all of the symbolism of these chapters. Basically tonight, my goal is that you will see the connection between Revelation and Daniel. That's my goal tonight. We're going to go deeper. You're going to see more about the meaning as we go along. But tonight, I just want you to see the connection. Revelation 13, beginning with verse 11. The first 10 verses, by the way, are about the beast that comes up out of the sea. And before you can know who this beast is coming up out of the earth, you have to know who the beast is that comes up out of the sea. I'm not going to tell you that tonight, and I'm not going to tell you who this beast is either. I just want you to see the connection. And as we go through our study, you're going to know who both of these beasts are. It's going to become very clear to you what the Bible is trying to tell us. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. Let me back up just a second. Spoke like a dragon. Do we have a place in the Bible where the dragon speaks? Well, how about if I call him serpent? Right? Very early in the Bible, the serpent speaks, doesn't he? Serpent, dragon, those are interchangeable terms. And what was it that the serpent said to the woman in the garden? He said, "You shall not surely die." In other words, he called God a liar. That was the first conversation that we have from the dragon. So when it says that this beast spoke like a dragon, that gives you an idea of the kind of things that this beast will be saying. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. I can tell you that both of these prophecies, the first 10 verses and the one we're reading now, have already happened. I'm just not going to tell you when they happened yet. We're going to get there. He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. It's in this verse that we actually move into the future. This part hasn't happened yet. So we're moving now into the future. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Now, let's link that to Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits. Anybody know how tall that is? It's 90 feet. A cubit is 18 inches, foot and a half. 60 cubits is 90 feet. Height was 60 cubits. Width was 6 cubits. So how broad is this statue's shoulders? 9 feet. 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Why would he make an image of gold? Remember the dream. He was the head of gold in that dream. And he didn't like the idea that Daniel said there would be another kingdom that comes after him, and it would be symbolized by silver. And so Nebuchadnezzar said to himself, I'm speculating, obviously. The Bible doesn't tell me what he said to himself. But he said to himself, no, not going to be another kingdom after me. We're going to have an image, and it's going to be all gold. Now, the interesting thing here, as an aside, is that the word used for gold here means gold colored, like paint, gold paint. Now, I say that's interesting because we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 3, where it tells Laodicea to buy gold tried in the fire, and obviously it's a symbol for character. When we get to that point, we'll talk more about it. It's a symbol for character. But in that instance, in Revelation chapter 3, the word used for gold there is gold money, real gold. Isn't that? Because we tend to think about it the other way. You know, the symbol for character, that would be, that would be something that looks good, looks like gold, maybe. And Nebuchadnezzar, he would have used real gold. Well, that would have been a lot of gold. 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. I'm not sure exactly how deep this man or this statue's chest was, but that would have been a lot of gold. But the word there is not the word for gold. It's the word for gold color. Gold color. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, administrators, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, all the officials of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Among those who were called, do you remember what happened at the end of chapter 2 yesterday? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel were all put in charge of different offices. So they would have been among the group that was called. Now, Daniel was not there. We don't know why. Apparently, there were some affairs of state that he had to deal with on this occasion. Somebody had to stay in the office, to answer the phone, stuff like that. So Daniel was not there, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his three friends, were all there. They were part of that administration that was called to this occasion. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." There's so much I could tell you right there, and so much I want to tell you right there, but I'm not sure how much time to take on it. I'm going to take a few moments. Is that okay? I'm going to get you out of here by 9 o'clock, I think. But do you know where rock music comes from? Some of my church members know because I told them in a sermon a few months ago. You know where it originated, where it began? In the Old Testament, they worshipped the god Marduk. And they sacrificed their children to him in the fire. And the way it worked was, he looked like Buddha. You know what a big, the big belly, don't look at me, but you know what the statue of Buddha looks like. And instead of it being exactly like Buddha, Marduk looked like that, except this part of his stomach was open. And it was a fire pit. And they built a fire in his stomach. And his arms were like this, over the top of his stomach. That's the way the idol was constructed. And when they sacrificed a firstborn son, they would bring him bound, hand and feet, and place him in Marduk's arms. and the flames would gradually eat away the flesh of his body until he collapsed inward and fell down into the fire pit. You can imagine the screams that the parents were having to endure. Not a pretty picture, is it? I'm sorry if I've made anybody sick to their stomach. But that's what when you read in the Bible that, like Manasseh offered his firstborn to Marduk, that's what he did. He took his firstborn son, the prince of Israel, and he put him in the arms of Marduk, and he gradually burned to a crisp and fell into the fire pit. Well, it was hard for parents to listen to that, all of those screams. And so they came up with a type of music that would mask it. It was music with a syncopated beat, because an ordinary beat would leave pauses and you would still hear the screams. But with syncopation, you could really mask the sounds of a dying child. How ironic that it's our children who are drawn to rock music. At any rate, in this instance, it was a music that triggered a response of worshiping this idol. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. You see the similarity between this and Marduk? Not exactly the same, but kind of in that direction, the same. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Now, they didn't accuse all the Jews, because frankly, most of the Jews bowed down. There were only 3 holdouts: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You're probably all familiar with the story. They refused to bow to this image. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Now, this is the same king who acknowledged the one true God of heaven at the end of chapter 2. I don't have time, of course, and I've already said that, to go through all of this, but I want you to know there is a good ending to the story. Nebuchadnezzar eventually does become converted. We're going to meet him in the kingdom. As a matter of fact, he's as far as I know, I think I'm right when I say this, he's the only pagan king who got to write part of the Bible. Chapter 4 of Daniel was written by Nebuchadnezzar. And he eventually did get it. But as of right now, he hasn't gotten it yet. He acknowledged that the one true God of Israel was the God, and he advanced Daniel and these 3 men into important offices in his nation. But now he's wanting everybody to worship this idol. How do you reconcile that in your mind? How do you reconcile that in your mind? Well, how do we reconcile calling ourselves Christian and behaving like the world? We really don't have a right to judge Nebuchadnezzar, do we? We all have failings. We all have times when we don't live up to what we believe. We make mistakes that we regret and wish we had never done. Well, that's where Nebuchadnezzar was. And he had commanded this. He had made it a law. What was it the three Hebrews were trying to be faithful to when they refused to obey Nebuchadnezzar? God's law, right? God's 10 commandment law. What does the second commandment say? Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not bow down to them. Thou shalt not serve them. It was God's law. And they decided they would be faithful to God rather than to man. We're looking at the link between Daniel and Revelation. We're looking at why John told the story the way he did in Revelation. Because what we read in Revelation chapter 13, beginning with verse 11, is a picture of our very near future. And this is where he's drawing from when he paints that picture. We need to understand Daniel if we're going to understand Revelation. Not just Daniel. It's scattered all through the Old Testament. Places where we have clues to what all the symbols of Revelation mean. And this is one of those places. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? I have a feeling Nebuchadnezzar knew the answer to this before he asked it. Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, I want you to notice that the issue is worship. In Revelation 13 and in Daniel 3, the issue is worship. Who, what, and how will we worship? But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? I'll bet he regretted those words. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Dramatic. Put yourself there for a moment. Because Lucifer is going to put us there. That's what Revelation is telling us. He is going to put us there. And the question is going to be, who will we serve? These three men, I got to say, and you already know it, they were pretty tough. As a matter of fact, that stand that they took is not something you and I would ever do naturally. It's an indicator of the presence of the Holy Spirit in their lives, transforming them into citizens of God's kingdom of love and light. It allowed them to escape the devil's kingdom of darkness and selfishness. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is selfishness. Kingdom of love, kingdom of me first, selfishness. Not something we would ever do naturally. I mean, we would all like to think we could do that, but be honest, and I'm not asking you to raise your hands, just be honest with yourself. You have been in situations, haven't you, where somebody was making fun of God or making fun of the Bible or making fun of Christians or telling a joke that was off color. And it was so easy to just laugh and go along with the crowd. It would have been easy for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, they didn't actually have to worship the image. Everybody's sandal comes loose every now and then. You have to, get down and tie your sandal. That would have been easy, right? I'm not worshiping, I just, my sandal. Oh. Wouldn't that have been simple? Go along to get along. That describes our world today, folks. I mean, that's the world we live in. Go along to get along. And that's what the rest of the Jews did too. There were only 3. Out of the nation, there were, I don't know the exact number. When you read Ezra and you see how many were released to go back home, there were thousands, tens of thousands of Jews in captivity. I don't know how many of them were in positions of authority where they would have been called to this event, but there were bound to be many of them. And for the most part, they just went along to get along. And these 3 said, nope, not going to do that. And it doesn't matter if God delivers me or not, I'm not going to serve your false god. 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment, but he who fears has not been made perfect in love. Have you ever thought that through, what that means? Perfect love casts out all fear. How does that work? What are the mechanics that make this true? Perfect love casts out fear. You see, love is concern for another. Fear is concern for self. And the human mind can only focus on one thing at a time. Now, I know you can chew gum and walk, but you can't focus on more than one thing, which is why the Little League coach tells the Little League players, keep your eye on the ball. You cannot hit a home run while you're watching Grandma and Grandpa in the stands. The human mind can only focus on one thing at a time. And fear and love cannot exist in the same mind at the same time, any more than light and dark can exist in the same room at the same time. Perfect love, that is concern for others, casts out all concern for self. That's the exact, perfect picture of Calvary. Isn't that what Jesus did? He forgot about himself, and he focused upon us, our need of a Savior. His perfect love removed all fear from his perfect heart. And he died my death and yours. And we're being shown that Lucifer is going to give us an opportunity to love him back the same way he loved us. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. I want you to see how the Bible fits together. Isaiah 30:26, a picture of the end of the world. Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days, in the day that the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people, and healeth the stroke of their wound. You see, the events being described in Daniel are a picture of the end of the world. John knew that. And John is drawing from the symbolism of Daniel to teach us in Revelation what it is that's coming upon our world in the day in which we live. Daniel 3:20, he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Can you put yourself there? You no longer have control of yourself. You've been tied up, hand and foot, just like when a child was offered to Marduk. You have been bound. Nose itches? Too bad. Need to go to the restroom? Too bad. And now you're being carried to the flames. Wait a minute, Nebuchadnezzar. Can I have another? Will you give me a chance to rethink this? No, they remain firm. Firm in their commitment. Didn't matter to them. Okay, we're going to burn. So be it. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The soldiers who were carrying them couldn't stand the heat of the furnace. They got close enough to throw these three men in, but they couldn't get away before the furnace devoured them. Hot furnace. These three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast three men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see four men, loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." How did Nebuchadnezzar know what the Son of God looked like? Daniel had been witnessing to Nebuchadnezzar all the time that he was there, teaching him about the one true God. Nebuchadnezzar didn't get it all yet. He wasn't fully converted yet, but he understood some things about God and his love. And when he saw that fourth individual, he recognized what Daniel had been telling him. The fourth looks like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. It was okay to obey the king when he was telling them to do something that wasn't breaking God's law. Paul tells us we should submit to the authority over us, the government that we live under. We should submit to that, but not when that government or that authority is telling us to break God's law. So we see a classic example here of exactly what we're going to be facing. Revelation clearly tells us we are going to face a situation similar to what these three men faced. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed. nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God. This is the second time now he's been made aware that there is a real God. The God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Now here's clear evidence that Nebuchadnezzar still isn't converted. He still doesn't get it. I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Does God want people in His kingdom because they're there out of fear? Because they're afraid to not be there? Is that what God wants? If so, we ought to all get a machine gun and evangelize the world. You know, no, that's not what God wants. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't understand that yet. But it's coming. He's growing. He's going to make it. He's going to make it. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.